December 17, 1944, 05:30 hours. Hansfeld, Belgium. The Tiger tank's engine coughed, sputtered, and went silent. SS Obersturmbannführer Joachim Peiper slammed his fist against the turret hatch, the metallic echo cutting through the pre-dawn stillness. His driver, Unterscharführer Werner, tried again to restart the 700-horsepower Maybach engine. Nothing. The fuel gauge read empty. From below, Werner's tense voice rose through the compartment. "Reserve tanks dry, too!" Peiper climbed out of his command tank, his boots crunching against the frozen Belgian soil. Around him stretched the most powerful armored formation the Wehrmacht had assembled for Operation Watch on the Rhine. The Ardennes Offensive, 67 tanks, 149 half-tracks, and nearly 5,000 of Germany's elite Waffen-SS troops, all immobilized for lack of fuel. Through the mist, Peiper saw the abandoned American position ahead. Hansfeld, a crucial supply depot of the U.S. 99th Infantry Division. The Americans had retreated so fast, they'd left fires burning in barrels and coffee still steaming in metal mugs. And there, standing in neat rows like a gift from the gods of war, were thousands of jerry cans, the distinctive olive-green American fuel containers. Peiper approached cautiously, almost reverently. His adjutant, Hauptsturmführer Hans Gruber, cracked open a can, sniffed, and announced, "High-octane gasoline." Soon, Peiper's men were feverishly refueling their vehicles. As he moved among the stockpile counting, the numbers stunned him. 50,000 gallons. Enough to power his entire Kampfgruppe for the push to the Meuse River. Enough to change the course of the offensive. The Americans had left behind more fuel in that single depot than many German divisions had received in half a year. Yet as Peiper watched his men pour American gasoline into German tanks, a grim realization settled over him like the morning fog. If the Americans could abandon such abundance, what Germany protected with entire armies, then the war was already lost. Germany hadn't just miscalculated, it had completely misunderstood its enemy. 6 months earlier, in June 1944, Albert Speer, Hitler's Minister of Armaments and War Production, had delivered a report that should have halted all German offensives. The nation's synthetic fuel industry, the lifeblood of the Wehrmacht, had been devastated by Allied bombers. The Luna Works, which had produced 175,000 tons of fuel in April, managed only 5,000 by September. The Bergius hydrogenation plants at Pölitz, Bohlen, and Brooks were running at less than 10% capacity. The figures spoke of certain defeat. In 1944, the United States produced 1.8 billion barrels of crude oil. Germany, counting all synthetic fuel and captured Romanian fields, produced only 33 million, less than 2% of America's output. The Third Reich was trying to wage mechanized war with horse-drawn logistics. While America's forces were swimming in fuel, Major Friedrich Zimmermann of the Wehrmacht's Logistics Division calculated that the Ardennes offensive required 4.5 million gallons of fuel to reach Antwerp. Hitler allocated 5 million, but only half ever arrived due to transport issues. The offensive depended entirely on capturing Allied supplies, a sign of desperation, not strength. Meanwhile, the Americans had constructed a petroleum pipeline across France called Pluto, Pipeline Under the Ocean, and established the Red Ball Express, a vast convoy system delivering 12,500 tons of supplies daily to the front. By December 1944, U.S. forces in Europe were burning 1.2 million gallons of fuel a day, and still receiving 1.4 million. They were stockpiling reserves even as they fought. Joachim Peiper was no fool. At just 29, he was one of the youngest regimental commanders in the Waffen-SS, a Knight's Cross holder with oak leaves and swords, and a veteran of the Eastern Front, where he had learned that in modern warfare, fuel was more valuable than ammunition. His Kampfgruppe was the Schwerpunkt, the decisive spearhead, of the entire Ardennes operation. On December 14th, 2 days before the attack, Peiper attended the final briefing at Tondorf. General Sepp Dietrich, commander of the 6th SS Panzer Army, was blunt. "You'll have enough fuel to reach the Meuse," if you capture American supplies. Piper's Kampfgruppe received 31,000 gallons, enough for only 50 miles of combat. The Meuse lay 65 miles away. Failure was built into the plan from the start. When the offensive began on December 16th, Piper issued strict fuel discipline orders. Tanks would advance in single file to save fuel, engines would be shut down during any halt over 5 minutes, and capturing American fuel depots took priority over every other objective. The contrast with the Americans could not have been greater. That same morning, Captain James Rose of the U.S., the 743rd Tank Battalion, stationed just 20 miles from Piper's starting point, made an entry in its unit diary, received fuel resupply, 8,000 gallons, the third delivery this week, storage tanks already full. It was December 16, 1944, at 0530 hours. The German artillery, barrage that marked the start of Operation Watch on the Rhine, expended more ammunition, in 2 hours than the Wehrmacht had allocated for some entire campaigns earlier in the war. Yet even this massive display concealed the Army's deep fuel shortages. Piper's column began moving at 7:00 a.m., already running behind schedule. Roads that appeared as highways on German maps turned out to be narrow, often unpaved rural lanes. Within hours, traffic bottlenecks formed as vehicles, many designed for the wide, open Russian steppes, struggled through the dense Ardennes forest. At Lanzerath, Piper's first objective, his force met unexpected resistance from a single American reconnaissance platoon, just 18 men, who managed to delay one of Germany's most powerful armored units for nearly 10 hours. During that standstill, Piper's tanks sat idling, consuming vital fuel reserves. When they finally broke through and reached Hansfeld at dawn on December 17th, Piper's column had advanced only 20 miles, but had already burned through 40% of its fuel. At that rate, they would run dry long before reaching their halfway point to the Meuse River. The American supply depot at Hansfeld wasn't even a major base. It served merely as a forward fuel point for the 99th Infantry Division, what the U.S. Army classified as a Class 3B temporary depot. Yet what Piper's men found there surpassed the monthly fuel allotment of an entire German panzer division. Half-track driver Hans Gruber later testified, "We found pyramids of jerry cans, each holding 5 gallons of gasoline, stacked 3 meters high and stretching for nearly 200 meters. The Americans hadn't even tried to destroy them. The captured fuel turned out to be high-octane aviation gasoline, mixed with motor fuel rated at 80 octane or higher. Ironically, it was too good for the German vehicles. The Maybach engines used in Tiger tanks were designed for only 74-octane fuel, and the superior American gasoline caused performance issues in several tanks. As Piper's troops refueled, they uncovered more surprising details. Sergeant Wilhelm Hoffmann discovered shipping manifests inside the depot office. Being fluent in English from his pre-war work in his father's import business, he read them easily. The documents showed that the fuel had traveled from Texas to New York, across the Atlantic to Liverpool, then over the Channel to Normandy, and finally trucked 400 miles to Hansfeld. The entire 6,000-mile journey had taken less than 6 weeks. "I showed the papers to Obersturmbannführer Piper," Hoffmann recalled in a 1976 interview. He read them twice, then crumpled them in his hand. He said nothing, but his face went pale. We both understood what it meant. Nearby, Private Ernst Kara came across several issues of Stars and Stripes dated December 15th, only 2 days earlier. One headline announced the completion of a new fuel pipeline from Cherbourg to Verdun, capable of delivering 300,000 gallons per day, so a single pipeline that could supply more fuel daily than Piper's entire corps would consume during the offensive. To fully grasp the impact of that discovery, one must understand Germany's dire fuel situation by late 1944. Since May, Allied bombing had slashed synthetic fuel production by 90%. The Luftwaffe was grounding aircraft for lack of aviation fuel, and pilot training hours had dropped from 250 to just 60. The German Navy's surface ships had mostly ceased operations, while U-boats relied on snorkels to conserve diesel by staying submerged longer. Back home, civilian car travel had vanished by 1942. Gasoline was so scarce that the Gestapo investigated black market thefts involving single liters. Farmers were forced to use alternative fuels or rely on animal power. By contrast, Piper's men had just witnessed the staggering scale of America's logistical power. Fuel flowing effortlessly across continents and oceans, in quantities Germany could no longer dream of. While German forces were reverting to horse-drawn plows, the United States was producing nearly 67% of the world's oil supply. The East Texas oil field alone generated more petroleum than the entirety of German-occupied Europe. American refineries were operating at such high capacity that Standard Oil began experimenting with new petroleum byproducts simply to manage their excess crude reserves. With 50,000 gallons captured at Hansfeld, Piper's units pressed forward, reaching Billingen by noon on December 17th, where they seized additional rations, ammunition, and most importantly, maps identifying nearby American fuel depots. However, these maps exposed an unsettling reality. The Americans had fuel stored everywhere. Every key crossroads contained a depot, and the U.S. First Army alone maintained 3.5 million gallons in reserve. Piper continued toward Lineville, where his troops committed the Malmedy massacre, executing 84 American prisoners. Even this atrocity stemmed from fuel scarcity. Piper later asserted he lacked the gasoline needed to transport captives. By evening on December 17th, his vanguard reached Stavelot, site of a massive American fuel depot holding over 2 million gallons, enough to propel his division all the way to the Meuse. But as the first German vehicles approached, American engineers were already taking action. Captain John Brewster of the 291st Engineer Combat Battalion had been warned of the advancing enemy. His orders were straightforward: deny the Germans fuel at any cost. The Stavelot depot contained 289,000 gallons of gasoline, stacked in jerry cans across 15 acres. At 4:30 p.m., as Piper's lead elements neared, Brewster gave the command. Engineers poured gasoline trails between the stacks and distributed white phosphorus grenades. Technical Sergeant Paul Solis threw the first grenade. The explosion was immediate and massive, he later recalled. A wall of fire rose nearly 100 feet high. Within moments, the entire depot was engulfed. When Piper's tanks arrived, they saw a tower of black smoke rising 1,000 feet into the air. The inferno burned for 3 days, destroying enough fuel to move Piper's division to Antwerp and back. A witness later described the moment. The Obersturmbannführer stood silently atop his tank turret for several minutes, watching the flames. Then he climbed down and said, "They can afford to burn 2 million gallons just to deny them to us. What are we even doing here?" Across the Ardennes, American engineers followed the same strategy, destroying their own fuel to prevent its capture. At Stoumont, 1.1 million gallons were lost. At Spa, 2.5 million gallons more. Altogether, the Americans intentionally destroyed over 8 million gallons. During the first week, more fuel than Germany had allocated. For the entire offensive, this ability to waste enormous quantities stemmed from a logistics network, far beyond German understanding. The Red Ball Express alone had delivered 412,000 tons of supplies using 6,000 trucks running around the clock. Each vehicle consumed 40 gallons per day, meaning the system itself burned more fuel than German Army Group B received in an entire month. By December 1944, the Motor Transport Service operated 230 truck companies running on color-coded routes, delivering 20,000 tons of supplies daily, 3,000 tons of which were fuel. On December 18th, Colonel James Snyder, Chief Logistics Officer for the U.S. First Army, recorded simply, "Fuel receipts yesterday, when 847,000 gallons of fuel were issued, totaling 1,623,000 gallons used, leaving a net reserve gain of 224,000 gallons. The pipeline system supporting these operations was even more remarkable. Operation Pluto had established undersea pipelines across the English Channel, delivering 1 million gallons per day from Britain. From there, a vast inland network carried supplies further. The Cherbourg-Paris line provided 800,000 gallons daily, while the Seine line transported $650,000. By December 1944, Allied forces in Northwest Europe consumed 7.5 million gallons each day, while receiving 8.22 million. They were building reserves even during active offensives. As Kampfgruppe Peiper advanced deeper into Belgium on December 18th, the hopelessness of the German situation became apparent. At Stoumont, they captured another fuel depot, 5,000 gallons used within just 3 hours of fighting. The heavy Tiger tanks consumed 2.5 gallons per mile in battle, while Panthers burned 1.5. In the rugged Ardennes terrain, fuel consumption rose by 40% at Otto Dungler, maintenance officer for the 1st SS Panzer Regiment, later wrote, "By noon on December 18th, we had used 67,000 gallons since the offensive began. We captured around 55,000 gallons. We were operating at a deficit." American intelligence, monitoring German radio through ultra-intercepts, knew of Peiper's worsening fuel shortage. General Courtney Hodges ordered all units, enemy critically short of fuel, destroy all gasoline stocks at risk of capture. That same day, American C-47s completed 316 sorties to Bastogne, delivering supplies that included 160,000 gallons of fuel. The U.S. was flying more fuel to a besieged garrison than Peiper's entire battle group possessed. By December 19th, as Peiper's forces clashed with defenders at Stoumont, their fuel crisis reached a breaking point. Tanks were being abandoned not due to battle damage, but because they were out of gas. Peiper gathered his remaining supply, about 8,000 gallons, barely enough for one more engagement or retreat, but not both. Meanwhile, Allied planners were already preparing for January operations. Brigadier General Maurice Gilland requested 245 million gallons for the coming month. The request was approved instantly without debate. The contrast between the two sides went far beyond quantity. American vehicles were standardized and designed for efficiency. A Sherman tank consumed only 0.8 gallons per mile compared to the Tiger's 2.5. U.S. trucks managed 8 miles per gallon when fully loaded. Parts were interchangeable, and maintenance was simplified. The Germans, however, relied on a chaotic mix of captured and domestic vehicles with incompatible requirements. French tanks required different lubricants than German Panthers. Soviet trucks used parts that didn't fit German Opels. Every variation compounded logistical strain. On December 20th, Peiper received a radio message. Fuel convoy destroyed by Allied aircraft. No resupply possible. Continue operations with available resources. Peiper called his officers together. Sturmbannführer Werner Pötschke stated plainly, "We have fuel for 20 kilometers at most. The Meuse is 30 kilometers away." According to SS officer Hans Grueller's later account, Peiper concluded, "Gentlemen, we are fighting an enemy who burns more fuel to deny it to us than we have for this entire campaign. What we captured at Hansfeld seemed a miracle, but to them it was nothing. We cannot win." This realization spread quickly through German command. General Hasso von Manteuffel, leading the 5th Panzer Army, later wrote, "When I learned the Americans destroyed 8 million gallons rather than let us capture it, I knew the offensive was lost before it began." Colonel Friedrich von Dondorf, captured on December 23rd, told interrogators, "Your soldiers discard chocolate. Mine haven't seen any in 2 years. You burn millions of gallons while we count by the liter. How can we fight such abundance?" By December 21st, Peiper was surrounded at La Glaise, his tanks immobile. American forces, the 30th Infantry Division, 82nd Airborne and 3rd Armored, had a combined daily fuel allocation of 340,000 gallons. Peiper had perhaps $1,000. Private First Class Richard McKinney wrote home, "We've got Germans surrounded who ran out of gas. Our captain jokes we use more fuel-making coffee than they have for tanks." The American effort showcased industrial warfare at its height. Patton's Third Army's pivot north required 350,000 gallons just for redeployment. Unthinkable by German standards, yet achieved in 3 days. On December 23rd, clear skies allowed Allied aircraft to launch 2,000 sorties, each consuming fuel at rates that would have grounded the Luftwaffe for weeks. P-47s used 300 gallons per hour. B-26s burned 200. One day's air operations consumed more than Germany's entire offensive allocation. That night, Peiper abandoned his vehicles and escaped on foot. Of 119 tanks and assault guns that began the offensive, only 39 remained, all immobilized. These were destroyed with remaining ammunition. Oberstleutnant Heinz Gulls described, "We drained the last fuel from every vehicle, perhaps 200 gallons total. The Obersturmbannführer destroyed his own command tank. Millions of Reichsmarks in equipment lost to empty fuel tanks. Of the 5,000 men who began with Kampfgruppe Peiper, only about 770 returned. They had advanced 60 miles, seized several depots, and uncovered the overwhelming reality of Allied logistics." News of Peiper's failure spread through the German command structure. On December 26th, Field Marshal Walter Model reviewed reports on captured American fuel. His chief of staff recorded Model's reaction. The Field Marshal read the figures twice. 50,000 gallons at Honsfeld, 2 million burned at Stavelot, 8 million destroyed to prevent capture. He said, "We are not fighting the same war." When Hitler was informed on December 28th, he refused to accept the facts. Speer later wrote, Hitler dismissed the reports as propaganda. When shown photos of the burning depots, he claimed they were Hollywood fabrications. But those on the front knew the truth. Corporal Wilhelm Hoffmann wrote to his wife, "The Americans destroy more fuel daily than we receive in a month. They drive their tanks as we march. This war is lost." The fuel crisis reflected a deeper reality. By 1944, the United States produced half of the world's manufactured goods. An aircraft every 5 minutes, a ship each day, and a tank every 7 minutes. Petroleum production figures were staggering: 1.8 billion barrels for the US, 110 million for the Soviet Union, 33 million for Germany including synthetics, and just 2.6 million for Japan. The Axis combined produced less than 2% of America's petroleum. Every major German offensive after 1942 was limited by fuel shortages, while every American operation was fueled by unmatched abundance. Lieutenant Colonel Chester Hansen noted an incident on December 27th. A logistics officer reported that weather had reduced daily deliveries to 500,000 gallons. Some concern arose until someone pointed out that this still exceeded Germany's total offensive allocation. German prisoners from the Ardennes were more shocked by American waste than by their firepower. Watching U.S. troops discard half-eaten rations or use gasoline for heating demoralized them more than artillery barrages ever could. "We had always known about your production numbers in theory, but seeing soldiers waste more than we ever possessed made it real." Every German who witnessed your effortless abundance understood the war was lost. This realization spread quietly through letters despite censorship. Feldwebel Ernst Müller wrote, "Americans wash clothes in gasoline, feed chocolate to their dogs, and fire artillery for Christmas. We cannot fight infinity." The psychological impact shattered beliefs in German superiority. How could so-called decadent Americans command such wealth while the master race struggled for the basics? At the Nuremberg trials, German leaders repeatedly blamed logistics, especially fuel, for their defeat. Field Marshal Keitel testified, "We held operational superiority from 1940 to 1941. By 1944, we couldn't even move our forces for lack of fuel, while Americans maneuvered entire armies like chess pieces." Joachim Peiper, tried for the Malmedy massacre, gave revealing testimony. "Every decision after December 17th was dictated by fuel shortages. We couldn't maneuver, pursue, or even retreat effectively. Americans moved freely while we counted every liter," General Heinz Guderian echoed. "When Peiper captured 50,000 gallons, everything to him, nothing to Americans. The war was already over. That moment symbolized when industrial warfare reached its ultimate truth. Wars were now decided by production capacity, not courage. The romantic idea of battle died in the Ardennes among empty fuel tanks. Historian Richard Overy calculated that by 1944, Allied to Axis production ratios exceeded 5-to-1 across major categories, and nearly 50-to-1 in petroleum. No level of training or tactical brilliance could overcome such disparity. America produced 324,750 aircraft during the war. Germany, only 119,947. America built 88 410 tanks. Germany, 46,857. But the decisive factor was oil. 1.8 billion barrels refined by the U.S. in 1944 compared to Germany's $33 million. On December 24, 1944, as Piper's men slipped through American lines on foot, abandoning 39 tanks, 70 half-tracks, and 177 other vehicles, the reality became undeniable. They had captured 50,000 gallons. Miraculous to them, meaningless to their enemy. Unterscharführer Karl Unterführ recalled in 1975, "That morning, finding American fuel felt like winning the lottery. By evening, when we heard about Stavelot burning, we knew we had already lost. Americans had so much they could destroy what we would die to obtain." That 50,000 gallons equaled less than 2 days. Consumption for one U.S. armored division or 3 hours of the Red Ball Express. It was a rounding error in Allied logistics. Major General J. Lawton Collins later wrote, "The Germans' desperate attempts to capture fuel exposed their fatal miscalculation. They assumed we valued fuel as they did, as irreplaceable. They couldn't grasp that we had so much we could burn millions to avoid risk." Operation Watch on the Rhine collapsed under the arithmetic of industrial warfare. The offensive consumed about 2.8 million gallons, 40% of German reserves. During that same period, the Americans used 267 million gallons, nearly 100 times more. The Wehrmacht lost 100,000 men, 800 tanks, and 1,000 aircraft, but their greatest loss was the illusion of hope. Every German who saw American abundance realized Germany wasn't fighting a war. It was witnessing its own destruction. Piper survived imprisonment until 1956 for war crimes. On July 14, 1976, he was murdered at his home in France. Years earlier, in 1967, he told historian Henry Lehman, "Finding that depot was the worst thing. If we'd run out earlier, we might have retreated with dignity. Instead, we discovered Americans had oceans while we had drops. We learned what impossibility meant." The lesson extended far beyond World War II. In industrial warfare, logistics overpower tactics, production outweighs bravery, and abundance defeats resolve. German soldiers in 1944 were often better trained and more experienced. It didn't matter. America's industrial power could waste more than Germany could produce. That truth was written in every jerry can at Hansfeld, every gallon burned at Stavelot, and every Allied pipeline stretching across France. Colonel Trevor Dupuy estimated that by December 1944, each American soldier received 67 pounds of supplies daily, while each German got only 3. Americans complained about waste. Germans viewed that waste as unimaginable luxury. In 1984, 40 years later, veterans gathered at La Glaise. The museum displayed Piper's Tiger tank, still resting where it had run out of fuel. On December 23, 1944, former Untersturmführer Karl Wortmann stood beside that tank with Staff Sergeant Roy Anderson of the 30th Infantry Division. "We always wondered why you stopped," Anderson said. "We thought it was tactical." Wortmann laughed bitterly. "We stopped because the tanks were empty. You burned millions to keep us from getting it. How could we fight that?" Anderson fell silent, then said, "We never knew you were that short. We had so much, we never thought about it." That exchange summed up the truth of December 1944. One side measured by the gallon, the other by the millions. One fought for every can, the other burned oceans. The outcome had been decided long before the battle began. German records confirmed it. Army Group B's War Diary for December 1944. Read Deck 16. Offensive begins. Fuel at 70% minimum. Deca. 17. Piper captures 50,000 gallons. Deck 18. Multiple depots destroyed. 5 million gallons. Lost. Deck 19. Fuel critical. Units immobilized. Deck 4. Piper abandons vehicles. Fuel exhausted. Meanwhile, first U.S. Army records showed Deca 16. 3.7 million gallons in reserve. Deca 17. 2.2 million destroyed. Deca 18. 1.8 million replaced. Deca 24. 4.1 million available. Americans treated millions with indifference. Germans clung to every can. Beyond sheer quantity, American fuel reflected technological superiority. U.S. refineries mastered catalytic cracking, producing higher octane fuels more efficiently than German hydrogenation. American aircraft ran on 100-octane gasoline, outperforming German planes limited to 87-octane synthetic fuel. Additives like tetraethyl lead and ethylene dibromide gave U.S. engines an advantage Germany couldn't replicate. German engines often performed poorly on captured American gasoline not designed for their systems. Fuel shortages defined every soldier's daily life. Gefreiter Hans Müller recorded on December 20th. Marched 30 kilometers. No fuel for trucks. Past abandoned American vehicles with engines still running for warmth. They leave engines running, we march through snow. Medical services collapsed. Ambulances couldn't evacuate the wounded. Hospitals lacked fuel for generators. The war had become a contest of supply, and Germany was out of gas. Died waiting for transport that never arrived. Dr. Wilhelm Kirsting later testified, "We had excellent surgeons and plenty of medical supplies captured from the Americans, but no fuel for ambulances. Men who could have been saved died within 10 kilometers of help." These revelations shattered the German propaganda that portrayed Americans as weak and incapable. German soldiers had been told that Americans were soft and unprepared for real war, until they witnessed firsthand that the U.S. could produce and destroy more than Germany could ever imagine. Goebbels's diary entry from December 28th revealed his concern. Reports indicate serious morale problems. Soldiers write about American superiority, undermining our narrative. Despite censorship efforts, the truth spread faster than propaganda. The illusion of German superiority collapsed against the overwhelming power of American logistics. The failure in the Ardennes left Germany with no strategic options except a desperate defense. At Nuremberg, General Alfred Jodl testified, "After the Ardennes, we knew it was over. We had played our last card and discovered the enemy held all the aces." Recognizing German desperation, the Allies intensified their attacks on fuel production facilities. By February 1945, Germany's fuel production had come to a complete halt. The Luftwaffe was grounded, pilot training cancelled, and the Wehrmacht became immobile, destroyed piece by a more mobile enemy. By spring 1945, surreal scenes unfolded across Europe. German units surrendered not because of defeat in battle, but because they simply couldn't move. Entire panzer divisions sat stranded as Allied forces drove past them. General Major Fritz Bohlen later recalled, "We had 42 operational tanks, experienced crews, and full ammunition, but only 300 liters of fuel. Not enough to reach the next town. We destroyed our tanks and walked into captivity." Meanwhile, the American advance was slowed only by traffic jams caused by their own abundance of vehicles. Patton's Third Army alone operated more than 15,000 vehicles. Kampfgruppe, Piper's fuel crisis, became the defining example of how industrial capacity determined the outcome of World War II. When Piper stood among his captured men that December morning, he realized a grim truth. They had fought an enemy whose waste exceeded their needs. The numbers told the entire story. Germany allocated 5 million gallons of fuel for the Ardennes offensive. The Americans destroyed 8 million gallons. The U.S. consumed 7.5 million gallons daily. Piper's entire fuel capture at La Glaise amounted to 50,000 gallons, barely 0.6% of America's daily use. The Battle of the Bulge cost 19,000 American lives and roughly 100,000 German ones. It annihilated the Wehrmacht's final reserves, but more importantly, it revealed to German troops the scale of American industrial power, a strength they could never match. Piper's realization wasn't just about fuel, it was about the nature of industrial warfare itself. Victory would belong not to the most skilled tactician, but to the nation that could produce the most: petroleum, steel, and aluminum. In that contest, Germany never had a chance. The final irony appeared when American forces catalogued abandoned German equipment at La Glaise. They discovered 39 fully operational tanks left behind, not for damage, but for lack of fuel. Major Robert Harrison's salvage report recorded, "Fuel required 8,000 gallons. Classification: minimal. Source: local reserve. Time required: 4 hours." What had been impossible for Germany, finding 8,000 gallons to save its best tanks, was trivial for the Americans, a routine request that used more fuel than Piper's entire group at its peak. That was the lesson of La Glaise. America's abundance existed on a scale that rendered German scarcity meaningless. The war's outcome had been sealed the moment American industry reached full mobilization. La Glaise merely revealed what had been true since 1942. Germany was fighting an unwinnable battle, measuring defeat in gallons while America measured victory in oceans. Today, a Tiger tank sits in the La Glaise Museum, its fuel gauge frozen at empty. A silent monument to the moment when tactical brilliance met logistical reality, and lost. Visitors often ask why such a powerful machine was abandoned. The answer is simple: there was no fuel.